This is the Soundfackery podcast from Soundfackery Productions. Doing it wrong, but doing it anyway.
Hello and welcome to the Soundfackery podcast, a podcast about sound, music, creativity and collaboration. We're doing it wrong, but we're doing it anyway. I'm your host, Steve Kilpatrick, a.k.a. Soundfackery, and with me is Dr. Anikó Toth, a.k.a.
Coco Vocals.
Hello.
Hello.
And today we have with us the wonderful Justine Potter. Hello, Justine.
Hi, Justine.
Hello.
Justine Potter is a producer and development executive for TV and radio across drama, comedy, and children's. She works with writers to develop and edit their scripts right up until the production crews start filming. She works with broadcasters including BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, and Sky in the UK, as well as American and European broadcasters, and for indies including Red Productions, LA Productions, Savvy Productions, and CanCan Productions. She also ran BBC Writers' Room North, giving many writers their first break into scripted commissions.
Woo.
Woohoo! Very impressive.
Well, Justine, that was a pretty extensive biography, but how would you really get to the nuts and bolts of what you do if you were going to explain to someone?
I mean, I tend to be the person, if a writer's got an idea or a script, I'm the person that can understand why it is or it isn't working and get it to the point it needs to be commissionable. And I am often the sort of, I've done all sorts over the years, directed and produced in theatre and radio and TV, but I'm often the link between, I basically have a career stalking writers. So I'm the link between the writer, their ideas and the stories, and also between a production company and the broadcaster or whoever they're making the content for. So some of my job is sort of pitching and selling, but most of it is conversations with writers about killing people off and how it sounds and how it feels and what we should be doing and why. I ask why 60% of my job. So yeah, that's me.
It sounds to me like you're a little bit of a professional sounding board.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is, really. And if I work with writers newer on in their career, then they've often got a brilliant idea and there props a real authenticity to it because they're talking about something that they have an understanding of, but they've just got stuck. And it's quite difficult to see the wood for the trees. So they come to me, and it's very obvious to me when I read something where it works, and if it's a script, where it pings me out of the script and I'm suddenly not paying attention, where I've stopped caring, and where it just suddenly makes sense, or where it sags a bit, or where there's so much stuff in there that I can't understand it. And so they come to me for that support, really. If it's a really experienced writer, one who can gain commissions just by their name, weirdly, it's still quite similar. I did a drama for the BBC recently with a writer called Jimmy McGovern, who is very well known for social realist drama. And he was still as, don't show anybody the script, I'm sure this is rubbish, I'm not sure it's good enough, as everybody else, which was extraordinary to me because he's a genius and a hero.
One thing that's popping right in my head now is when I was working for you on a radio drama, you sent me a script. I remember reading it on the train down to London and actually, I had tears in my eyes. It was so emotional. I thought it was wonderful. But next time I spoke to you, you said, yeah, it's not good enough. I was yeah, it's not ready. And then the next time it came back, two characters, I think, one character had been killed off and another two had been amalgamated. And you're absolutely right. It was much, much better. But the layperson doesn't see those potentials of how we could tighten up or make the story more emotive by making these quite big structural changes.
Yeah, sometimes it's a tiny thing, and sometimes I'll say this isn't working, and the writer will say, actually, it's not that that's not working, it's this other thing, and that will explain that. Yeah. Often it's just asking for clarity. It just makes me really annoying to watch TV with because I will come up with the next line and it's always depressingly the next line. If it's a whodunit, I know. And I really like being surprised, but I'm depressingly not so surprised very often. There isn't much that surprises me. And if I'm listening to the radio, I'm often going, come on, if it doesn't get there quick enough. But the thing I absolutely love about it is that it's not just me. So yes, so if it's a radio drama, and it's really neat, and it's a tiny bunch of people, but there's the writer, there's then I direct and produce and script edit, but I also have the cast members, and then I've got the sound engineer and editor, and that can be the same person as the sound designer, but not necessarily. And then there's the people involved in the sound world beyond sound design, which is the music side, which is where you and I have worked together often, Steve, either as sound designer or as somebody composing work for a piece. So it's just meant I've got to work with some really interesting people in the sound world side of things. You know, any arts project, the best ones are just greater than the sum of their parts, aren't they? So now and again, there's been some of those moments where I've thought, oh my God, wow, this is incredible. And those times, I can think of the two specific ones, have always been because of the addition of music that's just made it beyond. So the two times in my life when I've had an experience that has gone beyond have been music related. And the first one, I was in a studio in the BBC and I did what's called a stage adaptation. So it's a show that's made for theatre, but then it's put onto the radio. And it was an adaptation of Władysław Szpilman's The Pianist, which has been made into a film. It's about a man who managed to hide out in the Warsaw ghetto during the war. And he's a pianist and he can't make any noise. So he plays all the way through the war silently over a piano, not to make any noise. And when he's captured, don't want to give the whole plot away, but he is captured and his knowledge of the piano saves his life in some way. And the way it was done for the Manchester International Festival was Mikhail Rudy was the pianist, a very accomplished pianist. He's playing all Chopin preludes all the way through, and alongside somebody just reading almost like extracts from the novel. It's an abridged version, and it's really simple. So it's a voice and a piano, but they're almost in dialogue all the way through. So the performer, Peter Guinness, would say something, and then the piano would echo it. And it was unusual for radio because you might hear a 3-minute Chopin prelude. And it was a risk for Radio 4 because anybody tuning in might have thought they were on Radio 3. But when we made this, I was sat in the studio with a guy called Steve Rinker, who's one of the main sound guys for the BBC Philharmonic. And we were listening, and I'm not an expert on classical music, despite being married to somebody who made the stuff for years. We were sat in this studio, and I had these Chopin preludes just pouring over me. And then the voice came in and then out again. And it was... there's not a word to describe it, but it was just beyond. It was absolutely incredible. And it was so simple that both the voice and the words and the story and the music did something together that was way greater than the sum of its parts. And that was phenomenal. And then the other time I think where I did have one of those moments is I worked with a writer who's a very popular novelist called Val McDermid, and she does crime. She's a queen of crime. But she's a fan of the author John Wyndham, who does a lot of sci-fi stuff from the sort of, I'm going to say 40s, 50s-ish, was his main period of writing. And he did a piece called The Kraken Wakes. Roughly, it's about a story of these beings and beasts that fall to earth and go underneath the sea. When we don't like them being there, we attack them and they fight back and do it very, very well and basically flood the world. But Val wanted to do it as a contemporary adaptation because really, I mean, his stuff is so prophetic and it worked within the sort of realms of climate change. If you take the story and bring it into now, it's unbelievably prescient. So we did that, but I managed to, just by being bloody cheeky, cajole the BBC Philharmonic into doing the sound score for this live. And I got a composer, Alan Williams, to write the music. And he felt that with a very contemporary adaptation, he would go for that 1950s B-movie kind of full-on vibe. And it was absolutely, absolutely extraordinary. But it was done live, and you've got the actors and you've got the orchestra, and it was extraordinary. But the thing that I was expecting it to be like theatre, where you would have the actors and the musicians together for a couple of weeks. When they said you've got an hour rehearsal with the orchestra for this 2-hour drama, I had to work with the actors for a few days before, and they had to learn the sound cues, and they also had to learn to be conducted by a conductor, and they've never done that because the sound and the music flowed. It was another character. The music was like the monster, the Kraken. the onslaught of the rising of the seas. So I didn't get my 2 weeks rehearsal, but then I didn't know what it was like to work with an orchestra, and I was so out of my comfort zone. It was horrible, but it was also one of the best things I ever did, because obviously orchestras are just extraordinary, and watching the conductor with the actors, who were terrified too, and with the performers, was wonderful. All the musicians loved it because it was something a bit different, and they knew the actors. They all particularly liked Tamsin Gregg. And then we got the audience in, and it was just incredible. You can imagine this massive, the actors, the end of the first drama is a point where these under the water sea creatures come out onto the beach, and they have these like tendrils that come out and wrap people up and pull them under the sea and crash through this village. And you've got the actors giving it large, and then you've got Tamsin Gregg, one of the actors, is just grabbed by one of these sea tendrils and pulled, and she just ends with a scream, with the orchestra screaming behind her. And it was phenomenal. And I can't now even talk to you about musically what was happening. I know it felt right. I knew it did beyond the words. I knew it was absolutely the right. It was a really good choice of Alan's to stick with the period against the contemporary version. And it was greater than the sum of its parts. It was extraordinary, really extraordinary.
It was an incredibly successful radio drama, and also the music sort of had a little bit of a life of its own as well, didn't it? Some of it was performed at the proms, I believe, which might possibly be a first for radio drama. I don't know.
Jarvis Cocker was doing a prom section or prom evening that was about under the sea. So this just fitted really well. So it ended up being part of that. And for me, it was profound career-wise, because I'd made at that point maybe 100 plus radio dramas, no more. I mean, lots of them. I've been making them for about 10 years for the BBC. Although every story's different, I think if you do a lot of a similar sort of thing, you stop being scared. And you can just do it very easily. And I never felt complacent, but I wasn't scared. That's all I can say. I was terrified doing that. I mean, I knew I was beyond winging it, and I had no idea how it would work. And there were loads of technical reasons why, instead of having an actor in a dead space, you're having them in a live studio and all of that. It was really complicated. But afterwards, it was a success. And I realised that I would never again be as scared making radio than I was at that point. And I kind of knew I needed to move beyond radio drama. I'd pushed it probably as far as it could go. I'd done it, and that was enough. So I needed to go and get scared in another field.
Wow.
Brilliant.
That's a great transition. So tell us about your next adventure.
I always wanted to make TV. I'd always thought I would do a little bit of radio and then just hop across to TV. But there's a real snobbery in TV land that radio is a sort of poor relation. And I would say the opposite. When it comes to me understanding story mechanics and character, I would say radio is the best grounding, because you can't hide behind whizzy sound. You've got the sound world, but the words are it all. And if you haven't got those right, there is nowhere to hide. And I think TV can hide an average script behind beauty. But yeah, I'd always wanted to make TV. Yeah. I couldn't get across. I did 2 years in radio drama, then I did it in my own indie for about 8 years. I found it impossible to get across to TV. So eventually a show took me on to teach me how to script edit TV, because it's quite different doing that to radio. The show was a show called Casualty, a medical drama on BBC One that's been going for about 40-something years. So I went down to Cardiff for 6 months and learnt how to edit scripts TV style. And after about 3 months, I thought, okay, I'm not the right fit to stay on a show like that is brilliant. But again, it's got a set form and a set shape, and I needed to do originally authored stuff. So I came back north. I ended up getting a job on Coronation Street, and that was as a script editor as well. Coronation Street, in terms of the way they have pitches in for stories, they do story conferences, the way they share the story ideas, the way everybody's quite equal in the room with ideas, from a researcher to a top writer. And the way it's run is like just a well-oiled machine. So I learned so much about the craft of doing bigger shows and the craft of structuring something. And I think I did about 9 months with them. And again, knew that I would want to do original authored stories. I just want to tell those stories. And the ones that the joy of radio, I always got to tell often stories of females, usually contemporary stories, and often something extraordinary that happens to somebody incredibly ordinary, and just finding that moment where, you know, somebody's life is thrust into something different. And I'm sort of obsessed with what makes them different, and also stories about fairness and so on. So I wanted a piece of that for TV. I ended up then working in the writer's room, which was a good fit for me because the writer's room is a BBC service that develops new writers. I got an opportunity to do a really odd project, and I just sort of got a history of doing really weird shaped projects. And somebody said, do you want to produce TV? And producing TV is a massive project management job, and you kind of need to know all the roles in TV, and I really didn't. However, you say yes. And the job was the Contact Theatre in Manchester, a young people's theatre company in Liverpool. And they had a show called I Told My Mum I Was Going on an RE Trip. And it was a verbatim piece, which means it was just recorded, audio recording of people's real stories. And they were young women's stories of abortion. And the way they did it is the director had recorded maybe 100 people's experience of abortion. So these are doctors, nurses, just everybody and anybody, young lads, what they thought of it, young girls. And then she boiled it down to these 4 characters who spoke all of the audio. But the way they did it is they had the person's real voice for the real recording on a headphone into the ear of the actor, and the actor would hear it and then repeat it with their intonation, tone, accent, everything. That's how the theatre show was. And so the show that we did for BBC Two and BBC Arts was a translation of that onto TV. So that was really interesting. And on the back of that and the writer's room, I got poached to go and work at LA Productions in Liverpool, who, again, often do quite a lot of stuff that's around social justice. They often tell more working class, ordinary stories than other production companies, often very northern stories, and they work with Jimmy McGovern a lot. I mean, he's just a hero of mine. I just think he's a genius. And he's one of those heroes that you meet and they're nicer in reality when you meet them. We did a show that was on the BBC last year called Anthony. Oh, this is so up my street, this kind of project. Anthony Walker was a young, very bright black lad in Liverpool. And in 2005, he was just sat at a bus stop about to take his girlfriend home. And these 2 coked up lads, white lads, just called him the N-word across the road. He decided he'd walk to the next bus stop because he could see that they were out of it and drunk, and he just wanted to get away rather than fight. They chased him through a park, put an axe through his head and killed him. Cut 15 years later, Jimmy agreed to tell the family story. Anthony Walker's mum, G. Walker. And G approached Jimmy and said, I want you to tell my boy's story. So we did. So Jimmy and I met with all of the family, police, everybody, and pieced together what happened. And worked with the family, who were just amazing people. And what Jimmy decided to do was to tell the story as if Anthony had lived. So when you first watch the drama, you meet this 35-year-old lad called Anthony who saves somebody's life. And then you go back to the point where he has his first baby. And then you go back to the point where he gets married. And then you go back to the point where he meets his wife. And then you go back and you end on the night, at the night that incident happens until his death. And it was an incredible piece about what is lost when somebody dies. I mean, an extraordinary way of telling that story. So that was like a dream job, really. And then I got poached again to go to CanCan Productions, and that's doing drama and comedy. And that's the same thing, developing writers, developing their stories and turning them into series and pitching and then selling them.
Yeah, I love this recurring theme of you constantly running towards the thing you're afraid of.
I used to find making content in the studio in the BBC really dull. It's everybody's behind the glass with 1,000 knobs and buttons. You're there with the sound person, and you have a little button to press to say thank you, we'll go again, or whatever. And you've got the actors giving it large behind the glass, and it's so distant. And I would always put myself in on the other side with the actors and just trust the sound people to get it right. So the way I make radio drama, and I have since the day I stopped working at the BBC and started working on my own, is usually in my house. So I've had every actor in my bed doing a scene. And that's because If you're doing a bedroom scene, then you might as well hear the rustle of duvet. You might as well hear that thing where your voice is like that because you're lying down. And actors love it because the kitchen, I've always been looking for a kitchen that's big enough for a table. So that becomes the green room and the gossip room. And then we just peel off around the house into the garden, out to the shed, up the road or whatever, to do the scenes.
Yeah. And there's a lot of very practical audio advantages to recording in your house, especially if it's set in a house. You already have the acoustic of a house. You can have the reverberation of a kitchen. You can have the quite dry, sort of dead sound of a plush bedroom. Should that be what your bedroom's like? I don't know. But it actually makes a lot of sense. And I believe Eloise, who you worked with a lot, when you're doing outside bits, Eloise shoots in stereo, didn't she, as well? So she was also capturing the ambience. So it's sort of cutting down a little bit on the sound design at a later date as well. Yeah, and she's often found like wandering around the hills for the right kind of snow when it snows underfoot or whatever. But yeah, I mean, Eloise is a genius. And what's great if it works, as you say, best when she's the person who is the sound engineer who records it. And so she knows she's the one mixing it as well. So that works really well. I mean, there was one example that I think was really interesting and really successful. And it involved about 100 people from the local community. There is an actress called Maxine Peake who's based in the north of England, and she has made loads of TV, radio, but her partner had given her a book of this woman called Beryl Burton, who was a 1950s cyclist who was from Morley in Leeds, who won against men. She was absolutely extraordinary. Across Europe, she was a kind of queen of cycling, and in England, nobody took her seriously. She said, I want to tell her story. And the sound of that, I think, was, and I think we won an award for, I think we did, but the sound was particularly joyous because we recorded it in the house because it was domestic, but we also recorded it on a bike. So Max has got a really good bike. We mic'd her up and I live in a place called Saddleworth, which is in the hills outside Manchester, and it is really hilly. And so we'd have Maxine, she was sick once, she really pushed herself cycling up a ridiculous hill from my house and then vomited at the top. We recorded it all. It was fantastic. The sound world of that was just fantastic because being outside worked, the domestic settings worked, as you say, exactly how you describe it in a house. And when we did the races, what we did is there's a little village at the top called Dobcross, and it was a Sunday morning, and I just said to put something out on the local grapevine, whatever it was, to say, we're doing this drama. We need an audience. We're going to do a cycling race. And what we really need is a real crowd, because we can add crowd noise, but it would just be much better to have them reacting as she passed. So there was about 60 people turned up to the local pub at the top called the Swan. And we did a few scenes in the pub where this character gets the awards. And then we did lots of her cycling back and cheering. And then we sort of tripled the amount of cheers and so on. But it was just fantastic because it felt like making TV with all the ease and simplicity of making radio. The drama basically is about her telling her that it's a life story. Her husband was alive. So we went to record him. He's now in his 70s, and Charlie's called. And we just recorded him and said, just tell us about it. It was a way to gather content for the script, really, beyond the book. But what we realised was he has this gorgeous voice, beautiful, calm, a voice that you can hear smiling, one of those voices. He told us the story of his life with his wife and how she would be going over to France, and he would, sleep in the ditches and hitchhike over there just to support her. And it was a real love story, actually. We threaded his story through the whole drama, and then you got the sound of the cycling, and then you got the sound of the races. I thought the sound world was the main thing about that. It was a great idea that Max had. She wrote it beautifully, but it was, the sound was the thing. And it's almost like a character in itself. It's like a huge character in it. It was a special one to do, actually. And of all of them I've done, that is one of the ones that I'll really remember. That's what I love about your work, is the sound is like a character. None of your pieces are just a play on the radio. They exist within a very clearly defined world, and they have fabulous sound design. and wonderful music.
To me, what's inspiring actually is that you're telling women's stories. Several women on the team telling this story of somebody who's not so well known, but who is, significant and whose story should be known, and who is a trendsetter and a pioneer.
Yeah, and there was another one. So Max then said that went really well. Maxine said, let's do another one. And she said, I really want to tell the story of 4 women who occupied a mine during the miners' strike. Now, the miners' strike, the main part of it was in the 80s, and a lot of mines were closed. And then a group of women, one of them who was Anne Scargill, so she's known predominantly because she was married to Arthur Scargill, who was the big trade union leader of the time for the miners. And basically what happened is these 4 women decided to sneak down an open mine and hide in there and not come out, and to let the world know that, the protest of trying to save these remaining mines. So we recorded these 4 women, and they're now in their 50s and 60s. And the extraordinary thing is one of them died just after we'd recorded it. We went to their house and they told us the story of what happened. All of these brilliant, strong women. These are women who weren't allowed to become emancipated in World War II because the miners' effort stays at home, whereas the miners' strike happened and there was literally no money coming in for a huge amount of time, and the women galvanised. They ordered food drops, they ordered food kitchens, they ordered soup kitchens, and they kept the strike going. So we recorded their stories. We then had the shape for the drama, which was then sneaking out down the mine, going down the mine, and then being down the mine, and then coming back up. And of course, they didn't win. The mines were still closed. But we asked them about this in the audio recording. And I sort of said, how do you feel? In a way, what you did, it didn't work, you failed. And one of them just said, we failed, but at least we tried. And that, it's going to make me go now, but that is almost like a fridge magnet for me. It's that kind of, we failed, but at least we tried. I mean, I think, if I were to not have a long life, I would say at least she tried would be on my tombstone. So we recorded it in the same way. We recorded it mostly at my house, and these 4 women came to the recording. So we recorded it with the actors. But beforehand, I just thought, you know what, we're going to push this. And Kellingley Mine was still open. And Kellingley Mine was where one of the women associated with these 4, it's one of the last mines to stay open. And one of these women's sons had gone down the mine to keep it open. But because he was surrounded by miners who hadn't used to been working for a while, he's one of the few miners left. But there was a rock fall because these were inexperienced miners now, and he died. So it was really poignant, this particular mine. But I managed to get all of the actors to go down the mine and see and feel what it was like to go down the mine. The mine closed about a year later. So we all got dressed in these boiler suits and went down and recorded some of the sounds down. So again, same sound designer, Eloise Whitmore, who's a genius, recorded the signs of getting all of your clobber on, going down the mine shaft, and then the sound inside a mine is obviously quite a unique sound. All of the actors, I think, felt that was quite special. And I think it really bonded us with the original women. And then when we recorded it a few weeks later, the women came to the record, shared their stories, and we recorded it partly down a cellar in Chorlton to get that. God knows whether it sounded any different than anywhere else, but it felt different. And then we also recorded it in my house. And I have there's this one moment, and again, it's the music. But they used to sing this song, and I've got a really croaky voice, so I probably can't do very well. But the words are, we are women, we are strong. We are fighting for our lives, side by side with the men. We work the nation's mines. Something like we struggle for the future, we struggle for the past. And it's here we go, we're the women of the working class. It's a gorgeous song. So what I did is I got them outside the house into the street, into the little lane where the house was, and got these 4 older women singing this song. And it was absolutely electric. You got the actors watching, we as, myself, the producer, and the sound designer, Ellie, watching, and Maxine, the writer. And these 4 women singing this song, and they just lived it. And the actor, God, it's going to make me cry, but the actors joined in as well, singing this sort of, really strong song outside. And a friend of mine who was there took a photograph. And when I saw the photograph at the end of the day, what I didn't realise is that my daughter was there, who was 9 at the time. She was looking it was in the photograph, she was looking out of the window of the house, down onto these 4 old women who had lived this experience and the 4 actors who were playing them in the role. And I just thought, that, if I could have ever given my daughter a gift of saying, you can be, just keep going and just fight for what you need to fight for, that was it. That was absolutely encapsulated. And it was around the music, the power of those songs. But we got the whole of Saddleworth Male Voice Choir to sing one of these songs that the miners would sing as they're coming up through the mines. And then we added that into the mix of the piece. And again, the male voice choir, I mean, you know how fantastic the sound of male voice choirs is, but the fact that it was a local working class, area, a local town singing this, and then adding that into these women going up from the mines and up out, it was just greater than the sum of its parts, really.
It's really interesting to hear how much you bring the community in, and how much your work is all about collaboration, not just with each other, but also with the actual people whose stories you're telling, as well as it must be a real joy for those people as well to have the opportunity to be part of these kinds of projects, the men's choir. And if I remember correctly, I think you two worked on a piece where a local choir was involved. Is that right?
Leeds Liturgical Choir.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was another brilliant one. Do you want to talk about that, Steve? That won an award for that drama.
It did. The award-winning Amazing Grace, which is now one I'm going to put on my CV. The award didn't go to me, though. But, I was lucky enough that you invited me to contribute music to one of your radio dramas called Amazing Grace, which was a fabulous story about an asylum seeker in Leeds and finding a home again with a community, a very different community from where she came, but a sort of a white Anglican community who embraced her. And in conversation, we ran with that idea of this slightly exotically fused Anglican choir. So the music we came up with for that, we had performed by the Leeds Liturgical Choir, as we said, recorded by my friend Paul Thompson. And then there were little stings and interludes in there that were sung by Anikó here and performed on piano by Kingsley Ash. And there was also a recording session with these school children near where you live, Justine.
Yes, I've forgotten about that.
Yeah.
Again, it's bringing in the community. Right. It's so cool.
Well, I mean, the story of Amazing Grace, it was a writer's first ever commission. You're not really supposed to get the woman's hour, the 5x15 slots on Radio 4 if it's your first time as a writer. But I just basically said, this writer's so good, if we don't take her now, you'll never get her. She's amazing. She is. She's called Michelle Lipton. And she had worked as a legal secretary for a law firm who did support asylum seekers and refugees. It was a sort of amalgamation of a story that she could never track down and various other stories. But the idea was that Grace was a mother in the Sudan, and when her village was burnt, she managed to grab 2 of her children and run and save their lives, but 2 were left behind. And so she ended up in Britain, and then her community was being connected to the church, as you mentioned, Steve. But she spent all of her time trying to find her children through the Red Cross. So the way that was recorded was, we did hear that these children were alive. We could hear them in the sound world of a refugee camp out in, I think they were in France or somewhere they'd been moved to, the 2 boys. And that was done in studio because you can't do that with the sound of, traffic on the A62. So that was recorded in a studio in London with the actor Greg Wise. And then we recorded everything else we recorded it in my mother-in-law's house in North London, who was very, very delighted because one of the actors in it was Patricia Routledge. And it was the elections, and she was a staunch Conservative, and the rest of us were all very woolly left Liberals. It was an interesting record. But yeah, the story is her fight to get the children back, and then her fight to the courts to keep them. So it was a really good drama with tons of grit and so on. But yes, there was a lot of music because it was around the church, because of Grace and her voice. And Wumi Masaku is an actress who has she's just got a gorgeous voice. And so it just made sense to build that in, really. So we did more, didn't we, Steve? I think it was just lots of conversations about where we could put, Steve saw the script early, where we could put the music in, how it could grow, how it could beyond, and things like recording the kids was just, let's just once we've got that theme of, voices and sharing through these songs, let's keep that going. And again, that was something where I think I got a lot from again, from you, Steve, saying this would be the kind of music, this would be the sound, this is how many times it could fit in, this is how we could use music to sort of enhance the drama, really. And whilst I knew that would probably be a good thing, I hadn't really got a clue how. So you were sort of involved. It was an interesting mix of you working with Eloise on this music of the sound design. There was a kind of both sort of shared that vision, really, and then you did your section and she pieced it all together in the edit, really. But yeah, gosh, it's interesting that my favourite ones all involve music.
And it was a really privileged position I found myself in with that, because I did already know the script before we went into recording, and I knew the script before I'd started writing. And I had chats with Michelle about some of the background that's not written into the drama, which ethnic group the character belonged to and things. And I went away and did research. I found some old Smithsonian recordings of music from tribes that the character may have come from. Yeah, it was wonderful. It was sort of, you could really immerse yourself into it and sort of taking bits of language and phoneticizing it. The music was kind of based on the music of the language of the Dinka people. A
lot of people in sound design and music get here's the finished article, off you go. But if there's an early collaboration, it's better. Full stop, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make it work. I did a drama not so long ago with, I'm going to get her name pronunciation wrong, so I'm going to ask you to tell me. Lorena, what's Lorena's last name?
Shablevichute.
Brilliant. I'm not going to repeat that. I'm going to let Anikó claim that one. And Lorena is a brilliant pianist. I did a project where a writer had written this story, only an 8-minute piece. It was her first BBC commission. She was from Northern Ireland, Ballymena. The piece was about, it was for Radio 3 commission, where music made a difference in somebody's life. And the story was about a man who had dementia and couldn't remember most of the basic things in his life, but his fingers carried music memory. And so when he played, all his forgotten life disappeared. And so all it was a single voice of this man unremembering and remembering through music and talking about how it feels, the dementia. So it was a single voice monologue and then the revel underneath it. And the way we did that is we recorded Lorena actually at the RNCM in Manchester. I mean, ridiculous. It was like a 7-minute piece with a brand new writer. And she said, well, I'm from Ballymena in Northern Ireland. And, I imagine somebody like Liam Neeson, who wasn't he a Jedi or something in Star Wars? I mean, he's like, he's a proper grown-up when it comes to acting. She said, we'd written with somebody like him in mind. And I sort of cheekily thought, well, let's ask him first and then see. So I contacted his agent in New York with no chance. And I got an email back saying, yeah, go on, I'll do it. So I directed him down the line from New York, and he was an hour and a half late, and it was his birthday. And of course, I'm sat outside in the office and I've got my headphones on and I'm just listening to his voice do this beautiful drama. And then we weave the music on underneath later in post-production. And I didn't realise he had a sexy voice until I had him in my ears directing him. I could hardly cope. He's just got one of those. I didn't think of him as hot beforehand, but my God, when you're just listening. Whew.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know where they are. I must find them. I made him record a series of phone ringtone comments that with his voice. I can't remember what I got him to do because he had such a sexy voice. I just thought I'm just going to ask him. But it was another one of those of just ask. They might say no. They'll probably say yes.
Yeah.
Isn't radio, they don't have to get makeup on, they don't have to turn up, they don't have to do costume. But it was a pleasure because I think Lorena enjoyed the process of doing, because she had to do all sorts of things like collapse on the piano and falter and things, which I think is quite hard for somebody who's so good and exacting to do. But then when we pieced it together, it really worked. And both those performers are so exceptional that it was lovely. I would have loved to have got them in a room together, but you can't have it all.
I'm sure Lorena wouldn't have minded either.
No.
Gosh, I must thank you for this because it's made me really look at radio again. It just makes me realise what a joy it was to do that and how lucky I've been actually to work with some pretty extraordinary people over the years. You don't kind of realise while you're doing it, and then it's only when you look back. And I'd not really thought about how music has shaped it all because it's not where I personally start. Really interesting. So I owe you for this. Thank you. I'll think about them differently from now on.
Justine, how would our listeners find you online?
at Savvy Justine on Twitter and at Savvy Justine on Instagram.
And where can we find you, Anikó?
I'm at Coco Vocals and cocovocals.com.
Well, I'm at Soundfackery. Surprisingly enough. It's been amazing to chat to you, Justine. Thanks so much for giving us your time and sharing your stories.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Justine. It's been great to chat with you.